What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, back with some more boxing. So, I felt the need to touch on this subject, and I talked about it on my boxing Instagram a couple days ago, so I wanted to make a video to follow up with that. And that's regarding the return of Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. fighting Bryan Vera in a rematch. Now, my thoughts on this, I'm glad it's happening, for one. I think the first fight was controversial, as you guys know, and I thought Bryan Vera did enough to win in that fight, and I'm glad to see him getting another big payday, some more recognition, another televised performance. So it's good to see that because there's been a lot of injustices in the sport of boxing where the decision didn't go the way of the fighter. Rocky Martinez versus Juan Carlos Burgos. Thought Burgos won. It was a bullshit draw. And we haven't really seen much of Burgos in terms of national televised TV. Same thing could be said for Richard Brill. He did fight against Bogaray on TV. That was on Showtime. But I thought he beat Brandon Rios based on outboxing him. And they never rematched or anything like that. So it's good to see Bryan Vera is getting a rematch. However, I do feel the rematch is dangerous, and that's because it's taking place in Texas. Now, I have family in Texas. Shout out to everybody from Texas. Nothing against the state, but in terms of boxing, Texas has a reputation of being crooked and having crazy judging instances happen. You can look at Austin Trout versus Canelo, the open scoring. Look at Chavez Sr. versus Pernell Whitaker. Juan Diaz versus Paulie Malignaggi, the first fight. You can look at all these fights and see controversy. So that's one thing. Now, I do know Vera is from Texas, so I don't know if, since he's the hometown advantage fighter, I don't know if it would affect him. But Bryan Vera is not as big of a draw, even though he's from Texas, as Chavez Jr., just because Chavez Jr. carries his father's namesake. So I think he's just more or less a bigger draw, and people kind of vicariously live through Senior with Junior because he's currently fighting, and we know that Senior is helping in the corner and stuff like that. So some people are still going to be rooting for Chavez Jr. And as you know, Texas has a lot of Hispanic population, namely Mexican. And Bryan Vera, more or less, I don't know if he speaks Spanish. This is just a little quick point. But he's Mexican American versus Chavez Jr., who doesn't really speak English, and he claims Mexico just like his father. So it's a little bit different, and I'm not trying to get too politically incorrect or talk too much about race, but I do know that in some Hispanic cultures, Puerto Rico, Mexico, the people who don't speak Spanish in those countries, like if you look at a Danny Garcia, some people don't look at Danny Garcia as a true Puerto Rican. And I know it's fucked up, but it's just how some people are raised and how some people have their mindset. They're like, oh, Danny Garcia. They'll look to Miguel Cotto and fighters like that, Trinidad, because they speak Spanish as true Puerto Rican champions. But some Puerto Ricans won't even consider Danny Garcia really Puerto Rican, even though he is. He's Puerto Rican heritage, just based on the fact that he doesn't really speak Spanish, and it's a little bit different. So same could be said for Bryan Vera. Again, they're going to fight in Texas, high Mexican demographic of people, and some people would side with Chavez Jr. just because he's a truer, quote unquote, truer Mexican, because he's not really Mexican American. I mean, he is, but he isn't, if that makes sense. Anyway, I don't want to get too caught off. I know some of you guys don't leave some crazy ass racist comments and all kinds of stuff like that. So moving on, Chavez Jr., Bryan Vera rematch happening in March. I'm happy for this fight. Happy that they can set the record straight. I'm not going to do my prediction yet. I'll wait closer to the fight. One thing I will say to get in Chavez Jr.'s ass, he needs to come focused. He needs to really be the best Chavez Jr. because his last performance was absolutely pitiful. He's the bigger man. He couldn't meet the contracted weight, which is unprofessional. So I don't give a fuck if you're Adrian Broner, Chavez Jr., whoever. If you don't meet weight and you're always coming in heavy and stuff like that, it's kind of like you always have a built-in advantage and you just pay off fighters to come in. in that advantage. And we know Chavez Jr. has always had these weight problems. Like he'll be over 200 pounds in his off season when he doesn't have a fight. And coming off of the Sergio Martinez suspension, in which that was the biggest fight of his career, he got tested positive for having marijuana in his system, lost that fight convincingly, minus one miraculous 12th round, which he wasn't able to seal the deal and pull the trigger and stop Sergio Martinez. He got outboxed thoroughly and got beat up on for 11 and a half rounds, barring that section in the 12th round where he had Martinez almost out of there. But almost doesn't cut it, especially in the sport of boxing. It's not about almost, it's about what actually happens. So to come off of the Sergio Martinez beatdown and almost utter domination minus the 12th round and come back and have a 10-rounder with Bryan Vera, a much smaller person, lesser known talent, and the smaller guys backing you up, the smaller guys outworking you, out hustling you, throwing a higher work rate of punches and just a higher volume and showing heart. It doesn't make sense. You're the bigger guy. You are normally a vicious body puncher, and we've seen Chavez Jr. against pretty much other guys that aren't named Sergio Martinez and what he can do. Now, I will be honest, when Chavez Jr. first came out, they were talking about Canelo's and the Chavez Jr. I don't just give people passes. I don't just say, oh, because you're the son of a legend, you're automatically great, because Chavez Sr. is his own person, he's his own fighter, and he has his own legacy. So that doesn't automatically make you great. And again, I don't just give someone a pass. Just like Salvador Sanchez, one of Mexico's best fighters of all time, if not the best fighter of all time. But his nephew fought. That dude looked like him. He wore Salvador Sanchez, the original's trunks, and he sucks. He's horrible. And I'm not talking about the original Salvador. I'm talking about his nephew that I seen fight recently. I was like, damn, this shit is like, you can go to a local YMCA and find somebody, a motherfucker that can fight better than that. He was trash. He was horrible. So I don't really play into the favoritism just because you come from that lineage or that pedigree. I don't give a fuck if you're Genghis Khan's son. If you could fight, you could fight. If the motherfucker can't fight, can't fight. It is what it is. So when I first seen him, I was like, he has to show me something. And I wasn't too impressed. But as I've seen him grow, I've seen the level of skill. I've seen different things. I'm like, okay, he has a chin. Okay, he showed heart in this fight. Okay, vicious body punching. So he has showed me stuff, and I'm not saying I'm fully sold. And the reason I'm not fully sold is mostly Chavez Jr. and how he chooses to act. I think he actually could be a legitimate threat, which is something I wasn't sure when I first started seeing Chavez Jr. But I think he literally could be a legitimate threat. He has his father's chin. So anytime you have your pops' chin, that means you can hang around, take a good licking, good punch. And he's a vicious body puncher. He looks like he has power. He's bigger than a lot of guys. So the biggest hindrance to that is Chavez Jr. Having these makeshift workouts. He was keeping Freddie Roach at the gym waiting 3 hours and then never showed up. And he wants to move the couches to the side. He was smoking weed, waking up, eating Fruity Pebbles and all kinds of bullshit not related to boxing. That is not the work ethic of a champion. And that, to me, is the biggest hindrance. You could be the best talent in the world, but if you don't take this shit seriously, or if you have all these outside distractions, then you might not amount to shit, because hard work, dedication beats talent when the talent doesn't work hard. So Chavez Jr. just got to show me some of this fight. Like I said, coming off a suspension, long layoff against a smaller man, that shouldn't have been as close of a fight, where a lot of people thought Vera was robbed in the fight. I thought Chavez Jr. would be too much for Bryan Vera. Bryan Vera showed tenacity, durability, and a ton of heart, and in certain instances was backing up Chavez Jr. And it was a 10-rounder. It just wasn't impressive. I wasn't impressed with him. And especially since he didn't make the weight, it's unprofessional and unacceptable. So I just got to see more from Chavez Jr. I don't hate the kid. I just think he needs to get his shit together, just like I think Adrian Broner needs to get his shit together. So I'm looking forward to this fight. I want to see how he looks. If he can stop Bryan Vera or something like that and come back correct, then he's back on track to possibly get like an Andre Ward fight. I have opinions on how I think that would play out, but I'll save that to the future in case it actually does happen. But I'm just looking forward to seeing Chavez Jr. because I wasn't impressed with his last performance. And I think he has to take the sport a whole hell of a lot more serious because there's up and comers and the Gennady Golovkins and people who really seem like they want this. They desire this. They're not going back to being broke. They're not going back to Kazakhstan or wherever they're from. They want this, and Chavez Jr. has this built-in luxury being the son of a legend where he's going to get the highest payday even if he hasn't necessarily earned it. He's going to get a cool meal or whatever he's getting to fight these guys just based solely off of the name and who he is. If his name was like, you know what I'm saying, anything else, if he was like Emilio Rodriguez or something, like, who knows how much money he would be getting. But since you're coming from that name, we all know there's like celebrations and days named after his father. So coming from that, you guarantee have that silver spoon. So I'm anxious for this fight. I want to see how Bryan Vera looks and see if it was a fluke. See if Bryan Vera can duplicate what he did, get a solid win, or if Chavez Jr. just comes really focused and blows him out of the water. I think it's a dangerous fight for Bryan Vera because Chavez Jr. knows the implications of this fight. If it looks like the same, he might as well write off his boxing career and start rapping with Adrian Broner or something, because to look bad in this fight, then people are going to really question the first fight, and it's going to be a bad look. That'll be the Sergio Martinez loss. A lot of people considered this a loss with the Bryan Vera in the first fight. So if he doesn't look good in this fight, and by looking good, I mean convincingly winning, he's in bad shape. Another thing is Chavez Jr. in the Bryan Vera, the initial fight, he was like trying to play like Marquez, where he wasn't really letting his hands go. He had like a different fighting style, which was weird to me. He was like trying to play this counter puncher, and he was letting a much smaller man like bombard him like he was the bigger person and showboat, and it was just weird how he was fighting. So I didn't really expect that. And I'm actually grateful. I'm grateful that Chavez Jr. is giving him the opportunity. That does show a lot for Chavez Jr. I will say that, because there's other champions who have fought and had that close fight, and it was there have been other champions who have fought and had that close fight, and they don't set the record straight. They just skip that rematch. Like, oh, okay, fuck Richard Abril. Moving on to Mike Alvarado. You know what I mean? They're not going to look back. They're like, oh, that was a tricky fight. Fuck that. And they look towards the future. So I will give Chavez Jr. credit where it's due, and I definitely think he deserves credit for getting that rematch to Bryan Vera. Let me know what you guys think. As always, hate, comment, or subscribe. Till next video. It's Ego signing off.